Well, good morning and welcome to Westbridge Church. My name is Eli. I'm one of the pastors here. There's a few more of you this service than there was first service, so good job sleeping in a little bit. But also want to welcome those of you who are watching online. We're so glad you're with us, as well as those of you who are in our parent viewing rooms. It's a great option for those of you who have young kids who you want to keep with during the service. Today we are continuing our series called The Rest of the Story, and we're in part 5, and we're working our way through the book of Mark. The book of Mark was actually narrated by the Apostle Peter. He was one of Jesus' closest friends. He was part of his inner circle of 3. For over 30 years, everywhere that Peter went, he would tell people of the things he saw Jesus do and the things Jesus said. And now he finds himself in jail in his 50s, and history tells us that he never left the prison cell. Roman Emperor Nero had him executed. But before that happened, his traveling companion, John Mark, who has heard these stories from Peter time and time and time again, he's starting to gather them and write them down. He knows that the next generation is going to want to hear these stories. And so what Peter tells Mark becomes the Gospel of Mark, or the book of Mark. Mark got that from Peter. And so this morning, what we're going to talk about in these verses that we're going to go through is perception versus perspective. And I have the definition of perception here for you. It's the ability to hear or become aware of something through the senses. This includes visual, scent, touch, sound, and taste perceptions. So your perception is limited to your point of view and your senses. Whereas the definition of perceptive is this. Perceptive is the way individuals see the world. It comes from their personal point of view and is shaped by life experiences, values, their current state of mind, the assumptions they bring into the situation, and a whole lot of other things. Your perspective is a lot broader than your perception. How many of you have heard the expression that your perception is reality? A lot of people have heard it. I don't really agree with that, and I'll tell you why. I have 2 examples for you this morning. One, our new worship leader, Ryan Moore. By the way, I think he's doing an amazing job. If you see him after the service, give him a high five. I'm not sure if he's a hugger, but let's find out together. But him and his wife, Jackie, they moved their family up from Brownsville, Texas a few months ago. This is Ryan's first Minnesota winter. Ryan's perception of Minnesota winters might not actually be the reality, right? He has been running every day. He wears flip-flops to work every day. He's living his best life. But next winter, I'm so excited. He's never had his nose frozen. It's going to be amazing. But if he listens to us hardy Minnesota folk and he hears our perception, he might not be so blindsided by next winter. So let me give you one more example in case you're still on the offense that maybe perception is not reality. About 2 weeks after Ashley and I got married, we had our first and only fight, which is amazing. You guys know me. Only one fight. We are now going on 14 years this summer, and I can tell you there still has not been a resolution to this argument. So I'm going to bring you guys in on it. Maybe you guys can save us some marriage counseling today. So I'm going to let you in on it. This fight was about this phrase right here. The phrase different but good. Quick show of hands. Who thinks different but good means good? Nobody's voting? You guys are more awake than the first service. Who thinks different but good is bad? All right. I'm going to say I won the argument, so I get to tell Ashley it's great. Thank you. Well, I'll give you the context. So 2 weeks after we were married, a friend who couldn't make the wedding, she sent me a text and she just said, "Hey, congratulations on getting married. Looked like a lovely wedding. How is newlywed life?" And so my honest response was it's different but good. Let me defend myself. I was a bachelor for all of my 20s. I had multiple guy roommates. They like to play darts and shoot guns in the backyard. Being married to a lovely woman is different than having male roommates, but it's good. It's good. That's my, be on my side. Come back. When I told Ashley about this compliment I gave her, she did not take it as a compliment. She quickly asked, "How are you this unhappy in our marriage? We've only been married for 2 weeks." That was terribly confusing to me because I thought good still meant good. But Ashley's perception of different but good was much different than mine. She argued, yes, you can say different, but then you follow it with, it's awesome, it's amazing, I'm finally complete. Something like that, literally anything but good. So yes, it turns out that context matters. And this argument has become like a dinner party conversation. It comes up when we take couples through pre-marriage counseling. Yes, I get to do that. It's like, don't do this like I did, just be better. So that different but good, it comes up all the time. And now I think that I've told you about it, you'll start to hear it more. Like, how was the new restaurant? It was different but good. How was Jeremiah's message last week? It was different but good. How's the new youth pastor? Different but good. Like, I kind of see Ashley's point with that one. Okay, I'm gonna have to take that one out for next service. But the closest we came to a resolution of this argument happened a couple years ago. Ashley and I went with 2 couples to wine country. Of course, this conversation came up the first night. It was split down the middle. We argued and we laughed. Our marriage is good. Our marriage is great. Our marriage is great. But a couple days later, we're at a wine tasting, and Ashley takes this sip of wine, and she announces to the table, "This wine is different but good." I don't remember what happened next. I think I was told I got up. I might have ran around the table. I was high-fiving my team. I humbly was like, I win. 14 years, we did it. Didn't go well, but that was the closest I got her to admitting me being right. But how could we have avoided this 14-year argument? Both our perceptions of what different but good meant were different, and we both thought we were right, so we dug our heels in, of course. What would have helped us early on in our marriage is if we spent less time trying to convince each other of our own perceptions and instead tried to see it from each other's perspective. So if you want to change your perceptions, you need to try seeing things from the other person's perspective. And that's what we're talking about here this morning. Jesus is teaching his disciples a very important lesson about his kingdom. The disciples have their perception of what they think Jesus' kingdom should be, but Jesus is trying to get them to see his kingdom from his perception. So we're going to pick off where Jeremiah left off last week, and that's in Mark chapter 10, verse 32. It starts with this. It says, "They were now on their way up to Jerusalem." Like Jeremiah said last week, Jerusalem at that time was the hub, the center of the Jewish world. It was also a city on a hill. So they said didn't matter what direction you were coming from, no matter which direction you were coming from, if you were going to Jerusalem, you would say, "We are going up to Jerusalem." Modern day application would be people from Minnesota, from Iowa, from Michigan. Whenever we're traveling to Wisconsin, we are going down to Wisconsin. It doesn't matter which direction, we're going down to Wisconsin. Should have gone Iowa, should have. So the verses, they continue with this. It says, "And Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind them were overwhelmed with fear." Jesus is leading the pack. The 12 disciples are following him in awe. All these people are following them. And it says those people are overwhelmed with fear. There was a lot of tension at that time. Jesus had just been arguing with a lot of the religious leaders, and the disciples knew, this is building to something, and the crowd could sense that tension. The religious leaders were plotting Jesus' death. Jesus knew he was walking into danger. The disciples also knew it. So it says, Jesus said, taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. "Listen," he said, "We're going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed by the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law." This wasn't a big shock, I think, to the disciples. They had just been listening to Jesus calling out these priests and religious leaders for twisting the law to fit their religion, calling them out for their hypocrisy and their loopholes. And that was all Jeremiah's message last week. If you missed it, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it. But they were faced with a choice to either change to the way of Jesus or do their own thing, keep doing their own thing. And so they decided, we're going to do what we've been doing, and they started plotting Jesus' death. So Jesus continues by saying this. He says, "They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, and kill him. But after 3 days, he will rise again." Now, this is the third time in 3 chapters that Jesus predicts his own death. Jesus knows what he's walking into. He knows he's about to be delivered to the priests and the religious leaders and then handed over to the Romans. Some people wonder how Jesus knew that. In Luke chapter 18, verse 31 gives us the answer. It says, again, taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus said, "Listen, we're going up to Jerusalem, where all the predictions of the prophets concerning the Son of Man will come true." Jesus wasn't given special insight. He learned what was going to happen through studying the Old Testament scriptures. Scriptures like Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22, which clearly predicts his death. The story continues. It says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee." Now, I'm going to pause right there. James and John, as well as Peter, were that inner circle of Jesus' friends. They were the only 3 disciples that Jesus gave new names to. Being given a new name from Jesus meant you received a new identity, a new destiny, a new trajectory of your life. Peter's name meant the rock. John and James were called the sons of thunder, which I think are just awesome, awesome names for these guys. We're not exactly sure why Jesus calls them the sons of thunder, but there is a story in Luke chapter 9, verse 54, that might shed some light on it. It says Jesus and his disciples are traveling through Samaria to go to Jerusalem, and they're looking for a place to stay. The Samaritans and the Jews did not like each other, and their hatred for each other went back a very, very long time. The story says that while Jesus was looking for a place to stay, the Samaritans said they didn't want him to stay there. And so the sons of thunder respond to this right here with this. They say, "When James and John saw this, they said to Jesus, 'Lord, should we call down fire from heaven to burn them up?' But Jesus turned and rebuked them." Feels like a pretty big escalation on the sons of thunder's part of, you won't let me sleep here, so I'm going to burn this place down. But that might give us some insight to why they were called the sons of thunder. So we're going to go back to Mark, and it continues by saying this. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." James and John, they've seen Jesus heal the sick. They've seen him raise the dead. They know that he can perform miracle after miracle, and they know that whatever they ask him to do, he can do for them. But notice they didn't start with what they wanted. They wanted Jesus to commit to saying yes before knowing what they were asking for. Kind of like a genie situation with Jesus. You get 3. But Jesus responds, "What's your request?" he asked. The sons of thunder probably think, all right, we got him. We're walking him into a trap. He's going to have to say yes. But Peter goes on to reveal that what they're looking for is actually a place of honor and glory and greatness in his kingdom. So they replied, "When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in the places of honor next to you, one on your right and one on your left." When I read this verse the first time, my initial response was like, come on, sons of thunder, like, be better. Jesus, your best friend, has just told you that he is going to die a brutal death. And he is actively walking towards that death right now. And he just told you about it, and your response is, yeah, but can we have glory? Can we have honor? Can we have greatness and titles? We want the fancy chairs closest to you. And I don't think that I'm the only one who thought maybe James and John were wrong for asking this. But if you put yourself in their shoes and you see what had just happened, you might think otherwise. They were asking for something in which Jesus had given them every reason to ask. Just a few days before, Matthew records that Jesus had promised them that when he came into his glory, they would sit on the 12 thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what they're thinking about as they're walking towards Jerusalem. There are thrones waiting there for us. And they asked specifically for 3 things in those verses, and none of which I think are actually wrong. The first thing they asked for was prominence. This is what they'd been promised. They wanted to sit on their thrones and have honor and glory and the greatness that comes with it. They also wanted proximity. They wanted to be closest to Jesus. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be close to Jesus. They know they're going to sit with him. They think it's perfectly okay to ask for those positions of honor nearest him. All the disciples have already argued a few times about who's going to be greatest in this kingdom. So James and John decide there's no time like the present. We're going to shoot our shot, and we're going to ask for these best seats, the ones to the right and the left. The third thing they ask for is power, because that's what the throne represents. They've already experienced the gift of power from Jesus. They've been sent out to cast out demons, to heal the sick. They've even have the gift to call down fire on people that won't give them beds. So in their minds, they're only asking for what they've already been promised. But this, again, is their perception of what Jesus' kingdom was going to be. And that was not the reality. And I love how Jesus responds. He doesn't rebuke them, but he does redirect and redefine what they're asking for. He says, you're going about this the wrong way. So it says, Jesus said to them, but you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with? Oh yes, they replied, we are able. Without hesitation, without fully understanding what they were saying they wanted, the price that they would pay, with all the self-confidence, they just said, yes, Jesus, we can do it, we can take it, we're able. And what would we expect from the guys who are named the Sons of Thunder? This is called passion without knowledge. And if we're honest, some of us this morning, we might fall into that trap as well. Jesus is saying, you're not wrong for what you're asking, but you don't know the price tag that comes with what you're asking. Jesus knows the price tag that he's about to have to pay, the brutal suffering, but he'll pay. So then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. Again, notice how Jesus replies. He kind of concedes. He's like, all right, I'll give you what you want. You'll get what you ask for. If you want to drink from my cup and be baptized with my baptism, you will. And I think Jesus intentionally used those words, cup and baptism, in those verses. The cup represents, in this context, the cup represents what life hands you, a situation or circumstance in which you have no choice. It can produce something good or produce something bad, but it's something that's been given to you, which you have no choice but to drink. We've all been handed, I think, at one time or another in our lives, a cup like that, something that we didn't choose to happen, a sickness, a diagnosis, the loss of health, something that we didn't ask for, but we have no choice but to go through. Jesus' cup is speaking to the suffering that he will endure leading to the cross. He knows he's about to endure the pain, the rejection, spitting, the mocking, a cup of suffering that's been handed to him to drink. Jesus again refers to the suffering as a cup in Luke while he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus prays this prayer in Luke 22:42. He says, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. I don't know about you all this morning, but it brings me some comfort to know that when Jesus was facing one of the hardest things he ever had to face, he prayed. And it wasn't this long, eloquent prayer It was a short and desperate prayer, but it also contained something that our prayers sometimes miss, and that's the words, "Your will be done, not mine." How different would your prayers look like if you added that to the end? Now, Jesus, he also chose the word baptism, and that's a pretty common word in the Bible, found in the Old Testament and the New. To baptize, it means this: to dip, to place into, to dip somebody into water or some other liquid, to immerse them in it. That means the baptism of suffering that Jesus knew he was going to have to go through would totally affect every part of Jesus. He would be so completely immersed in it that it would touch and affect everything about him. And this is the baptism that Jesus knew was waiting for him in Jerusalem, and yet he walked directly towards it, his face set like flint. And now, James and John, I don't think they knew what they were asking for. If they had known it would meant that they would suffer like Jesus, they might never have asked for it. As it turns out, this is exactly what happened to James and John. James was the very first apostle to die. He was taken and beheaded by Herod. John was the last. We don't know exactly how John died. We know that he was exiled to the island of Patmos. We know that he underwent much suffering and shame and punishment for Jesus there. Some writings of the early church fathers suggest he might have been boiled in oil. Others suggest he might have died a natural death at an old age. But Jesus, he grants them the first part of their request. As for the second part of their request, Jesus says this. He says, "But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." I think if you look carefully at those words, you can see that Jesus is implying that the Father is the one that chooses this for the honor. He prepares them a place by the circumstances, by cups, by baptisms, and then he prepares the honor for the man. God always starts with people. His goal is to shape and to mold lives. And God's going to mold these two, preparing this place of honor for them as well. But then Peter turns his attention to the other 10 disciples. It says, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John asked, they were indignant. Indignant is not a word I use very often, so of course I looked up the definition. Indignant is feeling or showing of anger or annoyance at what is perceived as unfair treatment. They were all going up to Jerusalem. Jesus is seeing the cross. James and John are seeing thrones. The remaining 10 disciples, what do they see? They see James and John, and they get angry about it. Do you think they were angry because they asked the wrong questions, they asked for the wrong thing? No, I think they were angry because they got to Jesus first. They had already been arguing who's going to be the greatest, and James and John just beat him to the punch. And so it goes on and says, so Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. This is what the world's kingdom looks like. Those with power, those with authority, they use it to elevate themselves and to keep those under them down." And that version of what the kingdom is very different than what Jesus wants his kingdom to be. And at this moment, Jesus is trying to shift. He's trying to broaden the disciples' perception of what they think his kingdom's going to be. And he's trying to get them to see what his kingdom is going to be from his perspective. Now I can kind of just imagine Jesus pulling them aside, having them sit down. I kind of imagine like a kindergarten classroom, and he's like, "Hey, we're going to start this over. I just want to tell you something. This is how the world views power and honor and greatness. You look at the Gentiles and the non-believers around you. Have you noticed that they use their authority? They use it it's always over someone. They measure their power by how many people they have under them. And that's the mark of their authority. And it looks like this: the ruler on top, the people under them, and always using authority to keep them down. Jesus is acknowledging this is what the world's kingdom was back then. That's the way that people judged success and greatness. They didn't know any other basis for achieving authority or power. And you can't blame them for that, because that's all they've ever known. And I think if we're honest, this is sometimes how the world works today as well. But then Jesus paints this completely different picture of what his kingdom's going to be. He says, "But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else." Jesus takes the triangle and completely flips it. He puts the people on top and the leaders on the bottom, and their job is to lift up, to elevate, and to serve. Jesus completely flipped the world's definition of greatness upside down. In his kingdom, in his church, there's no using your power and authority over someone. There's no lording the power and authority in Jesus' kingdom. There's no struggling and striving and politicking for places of greatness and honor. According to Jesus, the pathway to honor and greatness and glory is serving. And not just serving people you like your family and your friends. Jesus says you have to serve everyone. Verse continues, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as ransom for many." Jesus is the ultimate picture of what a servant leader should look like. He's the standard of how to function in his kingdom. Jesus had every right to lord his authority over us, but instead, he became the one who lowered himself, who laid down his authority and his power, all just to serve us and to meet our needs. Jesus served everyone. He died for everyone. Now, I can imagine it probably got pretty quiet amongst the disciples. Maybe they're starting to think, all right, I think I'm starting to understand this Jesus' kingdom thing. Maybe they're realizing that Jesus' kingdom is not what they had perceived it to be. Maybe they're trying to start see things from Jesus' perspective. Maybe they're ready to stop fighting over who gets what chair. At this point, almost abruptly, Peter changes the subject. He begins to tell of an incident that happened to them as they were leaving Jericho. And apparently, at first glance, there's no apparent connection to the stories they've just been talking about. It says, "Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed them. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road." I thought it was interesting that Bartimaeus is one of the few people who Jesus healed where we get to know his name. But when you look at his name means son of Timaeus, which is pretty redundant to say Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, because they mean the exact same thing. But it's not until you look up the word Timaeus in the Greek that you understand why. Timaeus means honor. The blind beggar was named the son of honor. Now, what was it that James and John were asking for? They were asking for honor. We want to sit to your right and to your left when you're in your glory. So the story continues. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." It would have taken tremendous faith for Bartimaeus to believe the stories he was hearing about that rabbi named Jesus. To point out the obvious, he couldn't actually confirm these miracles with his own eyes. So Bartimaeus had to take these stories he was hearing on faith and on faith alone. The story continues, "Be quiet. Many of the people yelled at him, but he only shouted louder, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' When Jesus heard him, he stopped to tell him to come here." So they called the blind man. It's funny how quickly they changed from "be quiet" to "cheer up." "Cheer up," they said. "Come on, he's calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his coat and jumped up and came to meet Jesus. In the Roman Empire during that time, it was pretty commonplace for the government to issue a blind man a beggar's coat. Bartimaeus' coat was his identity as a blind beggar. I love that one of the first things Bartimaeus does when Jesus calls him is he throws off his coat. He throws off his identity. And I know there's people in this room this morning who are wearing a coat that they think defines them. A sickness coat, a diagnosis coat, the loss of health coat, a divorce coat, a cup of suffering that you didn't ask for coat. If you know me and what my last 4.5 years have been, I too am ready for a new coat. Maybe this morning God's telling you, hey, it's time to throw off that coat that you think defines you. Come to me and get your new identity. So Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? You notice that's the same exact question he asked James and John. I can almost see Jesus kind of looking over Bartimaeus' shoulder, trying to make eye contact with the sons of thunder. Like, are you watching this? And I can see James lean over to John and say, that blind beggar better not ask for my throne. And I can see John say, is this the time we called on the fire? But James and John, the mighty sons of thunder, who were in Jesus' inner circle for 3 years, although they could physically see, they were spiritually blind. Remember that when Jesus asked them, what do you want me to do for you? Their response was, we want honor, we want glory, we want greatness. We want those fancy chairs that are closest to you. Bartimaeus, while physically blind, was spiritually seen. I think it's interesting that all 3 men were blind, but Bartimaeus was the only one who knew it. So again, Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? Seems like a silly question to ask a blind man. Can't you see the look on Bartimaeus' face? Like, you heard me shouting for mercy, right? You saw me throw my blind beggar's coat, right? You saw me bump into a ton of people trying to get to you because I can't see, right? What do you think I want? But I think Jesus was encouraging Bartimaeus to be open and vulnerable in front of all those people and to share his greatest desire. Bartimaeus had drank from a cup of suffering that he had no choice but to drink from. But then he hears of this rabbi named Jesus. He hears of all the miracles he performs. He hears the crowds talk about how Jesus' kingdom is different than the world's kingdom, and he believed. Again, I think it's so interesting how simple prayers become when you find yourself in a hopeless and desperate situation. So you look at Bartimaeus' reply. It wasn't long and eloquent. It was short and desperate and to the point. He said, my rabbi, I want to see. Bartimaeus' response was so different than the sons of thunder response. Bartimaeus knew he was broke and he wanted to be whole. The blind man wanted to see, just like the lame man wanted to walk, and the deaf man wanted to hear. So Jesus says this, he says, go, for your faith has healed you. And instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road. So the big idea I want us to leave here today with is, it's Jesus does not reject our pursuit of greatness, but he does redefine it. I'm going to say it again. Jesus does not reject our pursuit of greatness, but he does redefine it. Jesus didn't lecture the sons of thunder for asking for greatness and honor, but he redefined what greatness would be for them. Not only did Jesus redefine it for them, but he showed it and demonstrated it in the life of Bartimaeus. The time had finally come. The kingdom of God is near, and everyone is invited to participate in it. But if we're going to participate in Jesus' kingdom, we also need to redefine what greatness is. Jesus is the king who came to flip the order of things. Jesus said, among you, it'll be different. Among you, this is going to be different, how I do things. It's completely different than what the world's kingdom is. So what does that mean for us? The world says, this is how marriage should operate. But Jesus says, among you, it'll be different. What would it look like if you served your spouse, only one spouse? Just caught that. What would it look like if you served your spouse and you lifted them up? The world says this is how jobs work, but Jesus says, among you, it'll be different. What would it look like if you would serve your coworkers, serve your employees, and lift them up? I know it's tempting as a parent to lord my authority over my kids to get them to do what I want them to do. But Jesus says, among you, it'll be different. So what would that look like if I led my family through serving? I know today's world says this is how your finances should be. But Jesus says, among you, it'll be different. What would it look like if you used your time and your talents to serve others? Again, Jesus said, among you, it'll be different. But we now know that different is good. The time has come. The kingdom has come near. If you want to be great in his kingdom, you need to live a life serving everyone. The great news this morning is if you want to be part of that upside down kingdom, if you've never said yes to that invitation, if you've never experienced the peace and the comfort that comes with having a relationship with our Heavenly Father, I want to let you know that the story of the Bible, cover to cover, is that God is building a family and he wants you to be part of it. And if you want to say yes to the invitation, I'm going to lead you in this simple prayer this morning. Father, please forgive me my sins. Forgive me for the times I've walked away from you. I admit that I'm broken and that I need you. I want a new identity from you. I want to live a life the way you modeled it for us. I ask you to adopt me into your family, to make me your son, make me your daughter. Help me to trust and follow you. And Father, for those of us who have said yes to that invitation, help us to love each other the way you told us to love each other. Help us to serve everyone the way you have served us. Give us the strength and the courage to do it. And we ask this in your name. Amen.